What if logic was never meant to silence your emotions, but to help you understand them more deeply? Zeno, the founder of Stoicism, never told us to reject our feelings. He taught us how to respond to them with wisdom. Could it be that emotions are not obstacles to reason, but the very signals that guide us toward clarity and strength? Zeno of Citium is not as widely recognized as some of the later Stoic philosophers like Marcus Aurelius or Seneca. But he was the one who laid the foundation. He was the original architect of Stoicism, a philosophy that would go on to shape the moral compass of emperors, generals, poets, and everyday thinkers for over 2,000 years. But Zeno was not born a philosopher. He became one through loss, confusion, and the willingness to rebuild his life from within. Born around 334 BCE in Citium, a city on the island of Cyprus, Zeno was originally a merchant. His early life was dedicated to trade and travel. But one day, after surviving a shipwreck and losing nearly everything, he washed up in Athens and wandered into a bookshop. There, he read about Socrates. The ideas struck him so deeply that he asked the bookseller where he could find such men today. The man pointed down the street to the philosopher Crates. Zeno followed, and that was the beginning of his new life. Zeno studied under several philosophical schools, Cynics, Platonists, and Megarians, but eventually developed a system of thought that was uniquely his own. He began teaching in the Stoa Poikile, a painted colonnade in the Athenian marketplace. His followers became known as Stoics, named not after a person, but after a place. And from this humble setting, one of the most powerful schools of philosophy in history was born. At the heart of Zeno's Stoicism was the idea that virtue is the only true good, and that living in agreement with nature is the path to wisdom and peace. But what made his philosophy unique was how rigorously he applied logic. Zeno did not believe wisdom was a feeling or a random insight. He believed it could be trained, cultivated, practiced. He believed that if you could understand the nature of things, truly see them for what they are, you could navigate life with calm and courage. He divided philosophy into three parts: logic, physics, and ethics. Logic taught you how to think. Physics taught you how the world works. Ethics taught you how to live rightly in that world. To Zeno, these were not separate disciplines. They were layers of the same truth. Logic helped you clear your mind. Physics helped you align with nature. Ethics helped you act with integrity. Together, they formed the foundation of a free life. But Zeno's logic was not about cold detachment. It was about clarity. He believed that reason was a tool for freedom, not to eliminate emotion, but to understand it. He saw that emotions arise from judgments, how we interpret what happens to us. And if we could examine those judgments with reason, we could begin to see which emotions guide us, and which mislead us. This was a revolutionary idea, because many thinkers before Zeno saw emotion and reason as enemies. One was wild, the other disciplined, but Zeno said no, they are connected. Emotion is not something to suppress. It is something to understand. If your thoughts are clear, your emotions become clear. If your logic is sound, your responses become wise. He taught that suffering comes not from events themselves, but from our opinions about them, and that freedom comes not from controlling the world, but from aligning your perception with reality. When you see clearly, you feel clearly, you respond clearly, you live freely. One of the greatest misunderstandings about Stoicism is the belief that Stoics are emotionless. That they aim to be cold, distant, untouched by anything. This stereotype has persisted for centuries. But it is far from the truth that Zeno and the early Stoics taught. Zeno did not want people to suppress emotions. He wanted people to transform their relationship with them. To the Stoics, emotions were not flaws. They were indicators, signals from within, pointing toward beliefs that needed to be examined. When someone feels anxious, it is not the anxiety that is the problem. It is the thought underneath it, the belief that something terrible will happen, or that one cannot survive discomfort. Zeno taught that if you change that belief, the emotion will shift. He did not deny pain or fear or anger. He acknowledged them, but he challenged the automatic judgments that create unnecessary suffering. Imagine a person who receives harsh criticism. They immediately feel offended. But what created that emotion? Was it the words themselves, or the belief that their worth is defined by what others say? Zeno taught that between stimulus and response, there is space, and in that space lies freedom. You do not need to be a slave to your first reaction. You can pause, reflect, use logic, and then respond, not with denial, but with wisdom. This is not detachment, it is maturity. Stoic emotional clarity is not about being unmoved. It is about being unshaken, about standing in the middle of life's storms and choosing your direction rather than being thrown by every gust of wind. It is about feeling, but not drowning, about caring, but not collapsing. Zeno knew that emotions have their place. Love, compassion, courage. These are not enemies of Stoicism. They are part of it. What the Stoics resisted was passion in the destructive sense, rage, greed, jealousy, fear that controls you. But even these emotions, Zeno believed, are rooted in thoughts, and thoughts can be changed. He believed in reason, not as domination over emotion, but as dialogue with it, a patient, honest dialogue. When fear arises, ask, what am I afraid of? Why? Is it true? When anger rises, ask, what am I defending? Is this response helping or hurting? In this way, every emotion becomes a teacher. Zeno's logic was not about being right. It was about being real, seeing things as they are, removing distortion. He knew that most people suffer not because of what happens to them, but because of the stories they tell themselves. Stories shaped by ego, insecurity, assumption. His Stoicism was a method for clearing away those stories, so that what remains is solid and strong. This is why Stoicism is not emotional repression. It is emotional wisdom, and it begins not with avoidance, but with attention. Zeno invited us to slow down, to examine what we feel, to trace each emotion back to its root thought, to question that thought, and then to choose how to act from a place of integrity, not impulse. And this practice does not make you cold. It makes you compassionate, because once you understand your own emotions, you begin to understand the emotions of others. You stop judging. You start listening. You become steady, not because you feel less, but because you have learned how to hold more. What would it look like to live according to Zeno's logic in today's chaotic, emotionally charged world? The truth is, we need Stoicism more than ever, not as an escape from feeling, but as a structure that helps us feel more clearly and respond more courageously. In modern life, we are constantly bombarded by stimulation. Opinions fly fast. News cycles move faster. We are encouraged to react before we even reflect. But Stoicism teaches the opposite. It teaches pause, perspective, practice. Zeno's method is not about making your emotions disappear. It is about giving you tools to master your response so that you are not at the mercy of every wave. This begins with awareness. Notice what triggers you, what patterns you fall into, what narratives you repeat. The Stoic practice of journaling, used by Marcus Aurelius centuries later, comes directly from this root. Writing your thoughts down is a way of seeing them clearly. When you see your thoughts, you begin to see your feelings. When you understand your feelings, you can reshape your life. Zeno would tell you to ask, is this thought helping me? Is this emotion pointing to something true, or something distorted? Is my reaction coming from fear or from clarity? You do not need to stop feeling. You need to stop reacting unconsciously. And that shift, small, quiet, consistent, changes everything. You become less fragile, less angry, less dependent on external validation. You begin to trust your reason, not because it makes you robotic, but because it anchors you. You can feel sadness without becoming despair. You can feel frustration without becoming cruelty. You can feel love without becoming possessive. Zeno's logic teaches us that reason and emotion are not at war. They're partners. Emotion gives color to life. Reason gives direction. Together, they help us navigate the full spectrum of human experience with strength and grace. This balance is what leads to inner freedom. Not freedom from feeling, but freedom from being ruled by your feelings. Freedom to choose your response. Freedom to live aligned with what matters most. Zeno's vision of Stoicism was never cold. It was fierce in its clarity, but warm in its foundation. It cared deeply about truth, virtue, and the well-being of the soul. It believed that human beings are capable of immense wisdom, not by escaping emotion, but by learning from it. When we apply his teachings today, we don't need to retreat from the world. We need to step into it with presence, with honesty, with the steady courage to face emotion not as the enemy, but as the path to understanding, compassion, and real power. Thank you for joining us in this exploration of Zeno and the deeper meaning of Stoicism. If there's one message to carry forward, it's this: your emotions are not your enemies. They are messengers, and with reason, clarity, and reflection, you can learn to speak their language. So we leave you with this question: What emotion in your life have you been fighting, when perhaps you should be listening? Share your story in the comments. Let this be a space of reflection and honest conversation. And if this message helped you see yourself more clearly, like and subscribe to stay with us here on the Life Philosophy channel. Until next time, stay aware, stay thoughtful, and let both logic and emotion guide you toward your strongest self.